Hello there, I'm Guildmaster Dan, and welcome to the Fourth Wall. Now, I just recently watched a video from A Fistful of Dice, where he talked about villains, and, well, that got me thinking on the topic, and since I don't have the Lawful Evil video up yet, I'm naturally in that brain space. So I thought I'd bring you guys a new world-building episode where we talk about villains. Now, I'm going to be referring to my Rule of Three world-building video, so if you haven't watched it yet, you may want to go and take a look at it after this video so you have better context for some of the things I'm going to say. Plus, it can be pretty helpful when you're building a setting anyway. First, when you're talking about villains, the thing you need to realize is that, at least from a world-building point of view where you're trying to populate your world with villains, is that there are two types of villains out there. There are the worldly threats, which are villains that are generally, they're born from the setting. These are the big threats out there. They're the arch-wizard that dwells in the Tower of Eternity in the Badlands, or the corrupt Pope of the Church of Progress. You know, these are the big villains, the ones that are, you know, mainly born from the setting that you just built. Likely these are going to be born from when you were doing your Rule of Three. These are the characters that you're going to see running these factions that you come up with. Next are the enemies of the party. These are villains that are much closer in level to your party, especially if they're level 1. They're likely going to be recurring villains, and they're just generally, they're on a different level from these worldly threats. They're much more down-to-earth villain, and I don't mean personality-wise. I mean they're closer to where the party is, and yeah, they're going to be just generally in that space around them. Regardless of which villain you're trying to build, whether it's the worldly threat or just the enemy of the party, there are two things I want you to remember. Number one, fun villains have memorable personalities. Number two, compelling villains have something in common with the player. And if you can manage to do both, you have a great villain. What do I mean by the fun and the compelling? It's the difference between the Joker and General Zod. The Joker is a fun villain. He's fun to run, he's fun to play, he's fun to fight against. He has this over-the-top personality that is fun to interact with as both the hero and as the villain. It's, you know, he's not necessarily the most relatable person in the world, but he's fun to deal with. Whereas you have General Zod, not on the same caliber. He's not as fun to deal with. He's not as iconic of a villain. But for Superman, he presents a compelling contrast. He's also Kryptonian. He wants to rebuild Krypton. You know, he misses the old way of life. But he doesn't care about humanity. He's willing to crush humanity in order to bring back Krypton and bring back the glory of Krypton. You know, he makes a good contrast for Superman to look inward, to, well, conflict. I mean, more on this later, but he's a compelling villain because he makes the hero look at himself. When building worldly threats, take a look at your setting. Particularly if you've done the Rule of Three, where you've gone through and you've found out all the conflicts in the world from macro to micro. These will generate faction leaders and essentially conflict enemies that can be opposing to, you know, where your party generally comes aligned in that scale, that continuum, if you will. Pretty much, you know what the evil empires are. You know what the opposing countries are. You know what the opposing religions are. You know generally where your players can fit into the scheme of things. So it's easy to look at the opposing sides and come up with, you know, villainous NPCs to oppose your players, whether in the long run or, you know, in the immediate future because they happen to be in that area. When you're doing this, though, I do have some recommendations. I'd recommend not being straightforward. For example, if you're making an NPC to an opposing country, to the empire that's on the other side of the war, you know, don't go straight forward. Evil emperors, kind of boring. They've kind of been done to death. I'd recommend taking 1 or 2 steps to the side. Take a step to the side. Don't go with your first impression. You know, if you have an evil empire, you're thinking, oh, evil emperor. Take a step to the side. You know, whether the driving evil power there might not, you know, doesn't have to be the emperor, doesn't have to be the person in charge. You know, it could be an evil court wizard, it could be an evil commander in the military, it could be an evil consul, or here's a compelling thought, it could be a prisoner in the palace that is actually the villainous person there, is actually the person running the show. The reason why you want to take that step aside is not just because it's boring to go with the straightforward route because it's been done to death. No. The reason why you want to take that step aside is also because it forces you to think about how that character can be villainous and be powerful despite the position that they're in. It forces you to think about the relationships around them and really build the atmosphere around this character and build their history and give you a good fleshed out idea of who they are and how they can better oppose your party. Now, when you're building an enemy of the party, you need to remember that they have to be in a position that they would often clash with the party. They don't necessarily have to be the same level as the party if you're, and I don't even mean mechanics, they don't have to be on the same level in society. They can be a little bit above them, but they need to be in a position that they're often going to be clashing with the party's goals and motivations. This means, you know, if they're just a party of adventurers, you know, it could be a policeman, it could be a competing adventurer, or, you know, it could just be an aspiring villain, such as a thug trying to, you know, work his way up in the criminal underworld, or a, you know, a dark adept who's trying to amass power to become an arch wizard himself. But generally, you want them to be in that space where they're going to be clashing with the party, where if the party is sent out to go kill some kobolds, that dark acolyte might be there and have, you know, enthralled the kobolds because he needs some minions to do some of his dirty work. Or, you know, if they're going after an artifact, you know, a competing adventurer might also be after that artifact. You know, you might have an anti-party set of villains, you know, that are, you know, constantly going after the same things as the party. You might have, you know, that policeman where anytime just hates the party, anytime they step out of line, he is right there to bring down the hammer of justice. Have them in that same space as the party. Next, you want to make them compelling, like we were talking about before, General Zod. You want to give him or her some quality that party members, doesn't have to be all of them, could just be 1 or 2 of them, that at least some of the party members can relate to. Much like we were talking about with Superman, they're both of Krypton, and they both, you know, miss their home world. Zod took a different path. Zod is willing to destroy and recreate the glory of Krypton. Now, that comes at the cost of human lives, which isn't cool with Superman. But Superman sees that this is another Kryptonian. This is a man of pride, and he's letting his pride consume him. It gives Superman something to look at and then reflect on himself. Similarly, you want your villain to have something in common with the players that they can look at and think about. It will make them more engaging for the players. If you have a paladin in the party, this villain could have been from the same church. Maybe he's a fallen paladin from that church. Now he's an anti-paladin worshipping, you know, some opposing god. Or, you know, it could be as simple as if they're in an adventuring guild, could be a former member of the adventuring guild. If you have a mage in the party and it's the dark acolyte, maybe they studied under a similar master. Give them something that the player's character can relate to, because you want to give them the feeling that this is a person who at one point was the same as, or at least similar to who I am right now. It gives them something to reflect on and to act off of, to play off of, and will generally make that character more engaging. Now also, if you want to round out this character some more, I'd recommend giving them some admirable quality. the thing to remember about villains is nobody's 100% evil. I mean, when you're dealing with archetypes, like in comics, you can get that 100% evil, insane villain like the Joker. But even for the Joker, the one thing that is admirable about him is that he is a genius. He is super smart. It is like morbidly inspiring how much thought he puts into things, and just how utterly determined he is to bring anarchy. Some admirable quality, even if it's not something like, the Dark Acolyte actually cares for orphans. He maybe he was an orphan himself, so he never puts orphans at risk. He always takes care of them. Maybe he even takes care of orphans. Who knows? It doesn't even necessarily have to be that. They don't have to have a puppy in order to make them relatable or likable. But some admirable quality. You could have that thug that's trying to climb up in the criminal underworld who, he might seem like irredeemably evil, but he might have some quality about him that they can really admire. He could be strikingly beautiful. He could be someone that, God, I hate that guy, but he is really pretty. Give them some quality that is admirable, whether it's something that makes them seem redeemable or it's something that can just be respected. It gives them some extra character. If you're having problems constructing a villain, or you don't really want to put in the work to really flesh out a villain, you just want something to fill a space, or you just need some help, there are lots of resources out there to help you. For one thing, I can recommend, from Engine Publishing, they have this great book on the cheap called Masks, 1,000 Memorable NPCs for Any Role-Playing Game. It's a great book that comes with a ton of NPCs, not just villains, and it comes with, everything that you need to know about that character, including their personality and their history and such, and things to keep in mind when role-playing them. That's a great way to fill in slots, and there's lots of good characters there, and like I said, you can fill out other things there. I'll make sure to put a link below to the website and specifically to that book so you can take a look at it. But also, don't be afraid to borrow villains that you like from fiction. I mean, I brought up the Joker before, and Joker's a great villain. If you like him a lot, there's no reason that you can't pluck him from Gotham and drop him into your fictional city. Now, granted, if it's a fantasy game or a sci-fi game, you may have to tweak the character a little bit. But don't feel pressured to, you don't really have, it's not necessary to change their name or their backstory, but you can. You like a psycho clown? You can have a psycho clown. You can borrow the personality and mannerisms right from the Joker. There's nothing wrong with that. Heck, one of my favorite reoccurring villains in my games is a Disney villain. I like using Dr. Facilier in games because he fits into a lot of settings, and he makes for a great voodoo man, dark sorcerer that can be a reoccurring antagonist. Don't be afraid to grab a villain that you like and plop him into a game. You can either just flat out drop him in there, or you want to tweak him, or you could just use him as an archetype to build off of. You want an evil voodoo man? Well, you now have a built-up character that you can, change around. You change your name, change your appearance, or change your personality. Essentially, you have something to start off of. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can even just plop them in there. You want the Joker, and you want him to be the Joker? That's fine. Have your adventuring party go up against the Joker. Personally, I'd like to see what the Joker would do in a fantasy setting. It would be fun. So don't be afraid to do that. If you're having trouble building a character, feel free to grab others to build off of, whether it's from a resource or from fiction. Now, naturally, there are a lot of different ways of constructing villains, and a lot of different viewpoints on how to make a great villain out there. So if there was something that I missed that you wanted to add, or even if you disagreed with something I had to say, please feel free to leave a comment below. Tell me about how you like to build villains, or tell me even about, great villains that you've ran in your games. I'd love to hear your stories. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Regardless of which type of villain you're building, whether it's the worldly threat or the enemy of the party. I want you to remember two things. One, excuse me. I don't want you to remember, excuse me. What I want you to remember. Damn it! Tea!